webinar. We are recording our meeting. Um, we are the Laurel Ridge Workforce Solutions corporate training team, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, Laurel Ridge Workforce Solutions is dedicated to empowering businesses and individuals through customized training. So we do that directly with employers across many different industries, and we design customized programs to enhance skills, boost performance, and support your long-term success. So today's session is part of our ongoing effort to provide accessible, high-impact learning opportunities that connect education to real-world business needs. Whether you're joining us from a small business, a large corporation, or a public agency, you're going to find practical insights and tools that you can start using right away. We are going to get started in just a minute. I'm going to introduce our speaker, but before we begin, just a couple quick notes. The session is being recorded and will be shared with all participants. We do have a chat feature, so if you have questions during the presentation, we encourage you to type them in the chat. If you're like me and over 50, you may forget by the end of the presentation. So please, if you have a question, type it in the chat and we will get to as many of those questions as we can at the end. And we're going to send out a recording of the webinar. You'll get that via email in a few days. It'll also be on our website. If you have follow-up questions and or you'd like to connect with us, you can definitely respond to that email as well. So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dustin Norwood, our instructor for today. He is amazing with over 15 years of experience leading enterprise-wide training and workforce initiatives. He's an expert in AI-driven learning strategies, and he helps organizations harness AI to enhance efficiency, engagement, and knowledge retention. So he's partnered with senior leaders and developed many high-impact learning programs to meet their business goals. And we're so grateful that he's here with us today. Dustin, thank you so much. I'll let you take it from here and I'll come back at the end.
Sure. Thanks, Christine. And I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. I know there is no shortage of AI courses out there and opportunities to engage with it. So I want to thank you very much for deciding to take your afternoon and joining me for this discussion. Uh, as Christine said, just to give you a little bit of background, not too much on it. Really, I've been in learning solutions for several decades, and I've had that rare opportunity to kind of see technology as it's changed my field and kind of new solutions have integrated themselves in old problems. For example, at the very beginning of my career, not to age myself too much, I was dealing with training regarding search engines and Boolean operators and things of that nature. And it very much, I'm just going to be honest, had the same sort of vibe as that as I'm hearing people's anxieties around AI, organizations' anxieties around it, around what it is and what it isn't. So hopefully I can take some of this experience I've had over the last few years as I've been working with organizations to kind of build AI policy, AI processes, start integrating it into their workflows daily, and start seeing it as a tool to meet certain needs that they might have. And that's really what I'm going to focus on today. So let me share. Obviously, I'm going to have some slides up here today. I'm going to go ahead and share and get these up and running. Sorry, let me get back to the beginning here. Had some stuff queued up. But where I really want to start, these are the objectives today. So, you know, overall, I'm just going to put it in a nutshell. Is like my biggest goal for you all today, honestly, is for you to kind of take a look at one or two tips that I'm going over, one or two use cases, the prompt engineering as we discuss it, and really either today after the session or by latest tomorrow, get in there and start exploring and trying some of these techniques, and then like most skills. it will get better over time, fine tuning it, learning new things. And then also on that third point, we are going to discuss today, because I know there's a lot of anxiety around the ethics and biases regarding AI. And so, what I'm going to focus on today in this hour is not so much the larger debate around the ethics. Around AI, but talk about your individual kind of responsibilities when it comes to that, and how you can protect yourself and make sure you minimize risk for yourself when using AI. So that's it. That's where we're going to hit today. I'm going to jump into it now and really start from the beginning about what AI is and isn't. And I'm going to try to not hit any of the jargon. We're just going to try to hit it very simply, because for me, and in learning, what we often talk about is building a bridge between the analog, what came before, and what the current technology or tool is. And so for me, and this is, you're going to hear me refer to it time and time again during this hour, when I think of AI, the analog for me is an intern. They are fresh. They lack a lot of context. They have access to all the files, all the work files, everything else they could possibly need to research, come up with plans, and predict it. But they don't have the context. They don't necessarily have the history. Certainly not going to let them make decisions. They're very limited in what they can accomplish. So I want you to keep that kind of in the back of your mind. AI as an kind of a new hire intern that's going to be your assistant in that case. So that's where we're going to start with that assumption. But really, what we have to understand are some underpinnings behind it. So, what it is and what isn't. AI seems to magically come up with all this content and it dumps it out there, and it seems like it's thinking through all of these different considerations and moving through them like a human would be. But in actuality, what it's doing is it's really a prediction engine. It's using its vast storage of knowledge and of everything that came on before the internet, internally, what you've trained it on. It's taking that large amount of information and using it to predict, give its best guess about what you want or what you need based on the prompt that you input. It's not necessarily thinking the same way you would, it's just analyzing and making a guess. What we use now, there are different types of AI. In today's focus, though, we're going to focus on that generative type, which is what most people are using out there. It creates content. It also helps you check and discuss different ideas that you might have brainstorming. But in general, what it's doing is generating content out there. Other types of AI are beyond kind of this. We talk about things like agentic and other things out there, but we're not going to hit them today. Uh, and remember, like, it doesn't have the same sort of memory that you do. It's not storing that way. It only stores those things if you instruct it to. For example, my AI, I was just talking to the folks before the class. Now, I've instructed it very specifically, and I've trained it on my writing, on my style, on my knowledge and context. So after 2 years of doing that, it's remembered all that. But that's only because I've asked it to remember. Otherwise, a lot of the things you go, it's going to misremember or not quite get it right. So that's another key aspect to remember there. And then most importantly is this last point. And that's what we're going to hit on mostly today, is that your inputs are the key towards getting the best outputs out of AI. It's a garbage in, garbage out kind of situation. It's not going to check its work. Again, it's an intern. It's busy. It's like a student. It's going to turn in the first thing it thinks meets the parameters that you've given it. It's certainly not going to check its biases and make sure that it didn't hit anything unless you instruct it to. And frankly, because it's predicting what you want it to, it's going to give you the decisions it thinks you want based on rather than the decisions that are best. So therefore, it's not that great at making decisions right now. So I want you to keep those things in mind, because the inputs are what will hit. Over on the right, you kind of see this journey towards what we call automation, towards large language model powered AI. AI. The biggest thing to understand is that prior to these large language models, pretty much all automation in your organizations or across the board was based on fixed rules and programming. It was strict logic. So it was like, if A, then B happens. If not A, then possibly C. And it was very structured that way, and it didn't handle exceptions very well. It would break the code, and certainly there would be all kinds of interruptions to that. Trying to program any thought decisions into it got very complicated very quickly. Well, the large language models allowed us to start providing context and start linking up all of these ideas like a network instead of just a straight line. And that's where AI really started taking off, the ability not to just go in a structured if then sort of straight line towards more of a what if or how about this or instead of that. And you can see already that language is becoming more complex and allows for all kinds of different outcomes that traditional automation just could not achieve. And so that's where we are today. I mean, that's how we got here. That's where we are. That's in general what AI is, generative AI that I'm talking about. Before I really jump into, because we're gonna talk about use cases, which I know most of you are here before, but before I jump into that, any questions about the general nature of AI, what it is, what it isn't there, because I want to make sure we're still on the same page. And also, before we jump into the actual use of it, I do have something I want to ask everybody out there. If you could go down as you're typing your questions, if you could go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'll notice it might be at the top or the bottom that it's going to have the emote button. What I want to choose you to do is choose the emoji that best you think best represents your comfortability or how you're feeling about AI at this moment. So go ahead and go to that emote down there and choose it, and so I can see how you're feeling at the moment. Right? Some people feeling okay. Good, thank you. You can give me a thumbs up. You can give me a frowny face for all I care. I, so far, people are feeling pretty good. Cool. Sharon's got my sunglasses on. She's okay. Cynthia, thanks for being honest. Yeah, kind of iffy. Hopefully, we can get over that. Good. Okay. So I just wanted to do that just for a quick pulse check to see where we are, how we're feeling. Let me check and make sure. Jenna, I just opened up the chat. I don't know how to interpret it, but I'll say intrigued is the one I'm going for. I think you're intrigued. That's what I'll interpret that as. So good. Let's now jump ahead then, because I feel like this is where the real meat of today is going to be. Three everyday use cases that you'll thank me for later, and I guarantee if you use them the right way, you will thank me for these later if you're not already using these. Let's jump in with number one here, writing. Obviously, the implications for writing and using AI are very large. It can save you a lot of time if you are in the business of drafting copy, emails, white papers, you name it. Uh, AI is there for you. But in, if you approach it in the use case there, we really have to define. So remember, as I talked about the old technology, how it was very linear, if then. But with AI, we can provide a lot more context, complexity to that decision. So that's what we're going to focus on in writing. And I've given you three kind of bigger areas here to focus on: the audience, the roles and tone, and the structure and constraints. And so those are the ones I want to keep in your mind as you're approaching writing. So, first, thinking about the audience. Who are you writing for? Think about this. This is, like pre-planning for a high school essay, right? Who are you writing for? Who's your audience? Are they laymen? Do they understand the technical jargon or do they not understand the technical jargon? How, I guess, elaborate or complex can you be with your language to this crowd? Think about that. What's the tone you want to strike with them? Do you want to be more friendly, direct, persuasive, neutral? What do you think their tone is? What do they respond to? Again, trying to paint some parameters around that type of writing for your audience. And then really looking at those roles. I wrote it twice because it's very one thinking about your audience, but also thinking about the tone that you want to take as well. And then also looking at what type of writing you're doing, perspective. Are you writing for yourself? Are you writing for others? Uh, really, what kind of role you want to take. And here's the cool part about AI, and I want you to remember this. When I talk about perspective there in the role, it's not limited to only yourself. And that's the advantage of it. I can write honestly, through my perspective as, a learning and development professional, I have management experience, leadership. I can write from that perspective pretty well. I have been writing from that perspective for a long time. You know what I can't write, what perspective I can't write very well for? A sales perspective, a salesperson's perspective. So I often am using that role and say, hey, especially as I'm working with my consultancy work, I'm saying, hey, OpenAI, can you help me write from the perspective of a salesperson who's trying to do this? So think about those. You can be somebody else or have the AI impersonate that and take that role on. And then that final bucket of content there, that structure and constraints, this is real, the real power is. So you got your audience and rows, but the structure and constraints are how you're going to fine tune what you get out of that writing. That means what length do you need? I'm often using mine for social media posting. So yeah, I'm typically saying, don't give me a 300 word or 400 word. I need 150 words, or I need 150 characters even. Very strict constraint on what it's doing. Also, what format do you want it to take? You can instruct it headings, subheadings. You can get down into the nitty gritty about exactly how you want it to draft that in the format you want it to take. Also, what kind of tone do you want to take? I'm known for being fluffy. So when I ask AI to do that, one of the instructions I always give it is please, because I know it approximates my writing style, which is fluffy, and I say, please don't make it as fluffy. Eliminate some of the flowery language, some of the redundant language, and make sure it's very clear and concise. That's one thing you can instruct it to do. And another thing that I often do, and this is another constraint, is common concerns and questions. So I often think about my audience first and things that might pop up with them. So for example, when I'm crafting learning content, one of those constraints that I put on my writing is do not use jargon. Use only this is not to say anything bad, but I do instruct it use a seventh grade writing level because I understand the majority of American society we're that seventh grade reading level is kind of a sweet spot. It's to make sure you're being very concise and clear. So again, I'm thinking about potential problems with the writing and going ahead and giving it structure and putting those constraints in my prompt. And we're going to do some prompting later, but that's kind of the overview of writing there. You can see that example. Act as a blank, draft a type of message for a specific audience, kind of like a Mad Lib there. Keep it at length and tone and avoid jargon. That's a very simple, concise prompt that's probably going to get you something pretty good. We're going to go into more advanced prompting, but following even just this pattern, this is a good start for you right there. So before I move on to the next use case, I'm going to open it up and actually ask you all, where do you, and you can put it in the chat or you can take yourself off mute, either way, where do you see yourself using writing the most in currently? Where do you see the implication? I want you to start brainstorming where you think this could have the most bang for your buck for you. So let's see some answers in chat there. Like, where do you see writing really helping you out? On the job or even at home? Emails. It's primarily my use a lot, Janet. Emails and social media are my primary uses of writing. Any other uses? HR is really good, Carrie, uh, specifically because you can train it on particular, like it knows the HR rules and regulations, Title VII, everything else there, and you can ask it to make sure and vet for any language that might be problematic with those. I've certainly used it for that case. Emails, reports at work, understanding. I have used it for RFPs and I use it for contracts when I bid on those as well, specifically because it's like a resume. I can put those constraints in there. Say, for example, the client is clearly looking for these things, so make sure to outline these things very clearly. You can do the same with the RFP if you know some of the needs you there. So again, most of the power you're getting is with those constraints. Brainstorming. Hold on to that one, Melissa, because we're definitely going to talk about that in a minute. Good. I'm glad you all are already thinking. If you don't have a use case for this, because it's easy to say it's writing, please by the end of the next 40 minutes we've got together, try to think of something you can use it for to kind of practice the writing prompts. And that would be great. But let's move on to our next one here for a second. Let me get back on my screen. Planning and problem solving. So Melissa kind of brought us into the brainstorming part of this. And notice I've kind of laid it out because as you look at these slides, I want them to kind of be a formula for you, kind of very clean laid out that way. So in the case of planning and problem solving, really in your prompts or your uses, I divide it into these three areas. One is what type of thinking do you want to do? What is the purpose of this session that you're having with AI? What perspectives do you want to take? You only have your own perspective. Sometimes you can take perspectives if you find you're a fairly empathetic person and you're easy to be in other people's shoes. But AI can certainly take any perspective you want it to take in terms of that. And then the third area being depth and framing, like how far into this analysis do you want to go and why are you doing that and what kind of frame can you put around it? So when I'm talking about these three areas, the type of thinking, do you want it to do deep thinking? There are certain large language models that are very concerned with analysis, and you can pick those. I'm not going to cover specific models today, but they're very tuned to do deep level analysis if you need that. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, do you just kind of need some ideas and being very clear with what you want out of that? Because otherwise, you might get something way too deep for the ideas that you're looking for, or you might get something that's way too surface level to be useful to you. Uh, Also, when I say here test assumptions and find blind spots, what I mean here is I want it to act as a kind of a devil's advocate. And this is a common way for meetings, and I've seen other groups do this, is I say, hey, AI, you're there to challenge us. You're there to find what we're missing. And it will certainly be able to do that. It's going to act kind of like asking that question is being skeptical for you. Also, thinking whether you wanted to do a cost benefit analysis. So, again, defining what type of thinking you want it to do for you, then what perspective you want it to take. Do you want it to cheer you on and be optimistic or skeptical? Now, I can tell you there was a little bit of a dust up, I think, last year, complaining about a new update to the OpenAI large language models that said it was way too optimistic by default. And I think there's a lot of jokes going around about like AI will tell you every idea is a great idea. And that's true. Because again, it's predictive. What do you want to hear? Oh, that's a great idea. You've thought about X, Y, and Z. Have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Have you thought about one, two, three? Again, that's AI being optimistic, trying to be helpful. But you can also just as easily instruct it to say, hey, tear me apart, AI. I want to know all the faults. I want direct feedback. I want you to question me on this. And certainly you can give it that perspective. You can also give it that perspective, as we talked about roles, in terms of thinking. Imagine you want to do a brainstorming session, but you want to do a brainstorming session where there are three different customer types there. You can tell AI, I want you to assume these three different client customer roles and with these different ideas or thought patterns or behaviors, and it will try to simulate those perspectives for you so you can get a better. Now, to be honest, it's still going to be 10 times better if you go and maybe survey or do a focus group session with those customers. But if you don't have that and you don't have the time, the AI will approximate that and predict some of their responses for you. And then the final area there is that depth and framing area. So how high level do you need it? Do you need just the summary or do you need it very detailed? Do you want it to go into sites and sources? Do you want to state the stats? Uh, how detailed do you want this thing? Is this a white paper or is this just a everyday email that you're writing? So there's all kinds of things you need to think about in terms of your depth and framing. Also, talking about whether you wanted to discuss both sides of the issues, the pros and cons. That's the framing you could have. By default, again, with the optimistic kind of take it takes, it's gonna take your directions as you give it and really focus on helping you make an argument for whatever you want to make. But if you instruct it to say, make sure that it's a well-rounded and thoughtful write-up on whatever subject you're talking to about it. It's going to cover those areas that you may have not considered. So again, thinking about what you want in terms of the depth and framing, and then also talking about the risk and overview and potential impacts of that. What do I mean? It because one of the key areas of writing that people use this for is to kind of come up with planning and decision making frameworks and everything else. One thing that AI can also do is say, okay, based on these decisions, based on the brainstorming, can you now give me the framing of the potential risk? Or what we can expect from these impacts. Now, again, it's going to predict it. It doesn't have all the information, but it can at least estimate those things for you and say, here's what's most likely to occur, or here are the risks you need to be concerned about. So this is a lot to think about here. I've given an example prompt here. Uh, Act as a critical thinking partner. Here's the situation. You define that situation. What assumptions might I be making about that situation? What am I not considering? So this is a great prompt to kind of check your assumptions on some thought or something that you're doing around a project that maybe you're worried about blind spots around it. So again, defining those. This is a little bit more amorphous out there than writing. So I think the question I ask you now is where do you where do you think in your organizations or on your jobs right now do you think this sort of process, bringing AI into that conversation, can benefit you? Like, in what sort of situations? Where I've used it, frankly, again, is in team meetings, where I know my staff are all on the same page and we kind of got the group think going on. Love to bring AI in there. What applications do you see of this kind of use case for you? Oh, this is a good, John. Thanks for that recommendation in the chat, by the way. Yeah, Coursera has some great ones. Project management. And I can certainly, Pamela, like if you want to talk and email me sometime afterwards, we can always talk about implications for project management because I certainly use it, especially in the generation of my task and a lot of the other sort of things because I miss a lot of steps when I'm trying to generate those. So I always get to look back and say, what am I missing? What have I forgot to assign? Are these time? Is this time reasonable? I use it a lot to kind of check my assumptions on project management, if that helps. Any other use cases? Well, if not, I want you to think about this more and more. Because again, it's not necessarily an everyday use like writing that's going to save you a lot of time, but it is a way that's going to improve your thinking and planning, especially for your teams and your organization. This is a great use case and certainly a common one that some organizations use daily. But let's move to the third use case here for time's sake and talk about organizing. Organizing is one of the best use cases, and it does it like a pro for AI, for most AI models. And again, I'm taking that same kind of model, kind of grouping it into those three areas. And when I think about prompting or using use of AI for organizing, I really think about what outputs do I want, how do I want it structured, and what context there do I need it in. And so deciding those three things and trying to come up with a prompt and use case for it is going to net you a whole lot, well, a whole lot less uh stomach ache regarding trying to, because I'm going to be honest, I am not a very organized person. I depended on tons of apps and programs prior to AI, and over the last couple of years I've transitioned to having AI organized for me, and I'm very thankful for it. And this is kind of my thinking around it. First, your output format. So, what agenda? Do you need an agenda? Do you need to broadcast the prerequisites? What sort of things do you need it to make a checklist for you with? In other words, like great at making checklists. AI is make me a checklist for this. Make sure it has every subtask. Have I forgotten any task? All those are great there. In terms of it, do you always instructing, and I always do this in team meetings to output a summary of those things. But in the summary, and we'll talk about the context and structure of it, making sure you give it some constraints so that you're hyper focusing on it there. And then, do you want it to output decision points, action items, things that you need to do, like a task list? Yes, yes to all the above. Always do it. And then as you're looking at the structure there, how do you want it to prioritize those things? It used to be that I accepted the organization, for example, I've had an AI note taker for years now. And I always accepted it out of the box. I just took the notes and said, great. It did a great job of telling me exactly everything I need in linear fashion. I could read through it if there was anything I missed. It was great. It told me who was speaking. But it wasn't as good as it could have been had I thought about structure a little bit more in my prompting, what I was asking for. Because had I known that I could have had it prioritize action items and decision points and priority actions and put them up front, I would have done that from the very beginning. So that's why I'm advising you play with it. If you say, okay, what are the most even if you say specifically, I want the two most important things that I need to get done today from this 2 hour meeting I just have, it will prioritize that and do that. So think about not only about what you're asking it for, but how you want it to prioritize that for you and in what kind of sections. I organize mine in sections now, like decision points, follow-up items, and in general items. Those are my three big sections that I have in my notes and organization there. And then finally, in that context area, looking looking for it to output, what do you need it for? What's the purpose of it? What objectives are you trying to meet? So to give you an idea what I'm talking about there, if we're talking about I want you to organize, look, actually let's go back to what Pamela was talking about. Let's talk about project management. Say I want you to take this project charter and I want you to, from it, develop a list of objectives and subtasks, tasks and subtasks from it. That's the context I want you to evaluate this charter from, and it will do that. So that's what I'm talking about there. You might start with one big package of data, one big write up, and say, okay, I want you to take this big thing, this big weighty thing, and I have a specific objective I want you to accomplish with it. I want you to only output this. So start thinking of those questions. What level of detail? Again, that's the thing that comes out there. And more importantly, the evaluation of that. It will do it. And that's something that people overlook quite frequently, honestly, when they're organizing. And what I mean by evaluation, you you can have, I'll go back to my example of a meeting. You can have a meeting, you can have it output all the priority, the decisions, ownership, follow up, have it output all that. And then you can ask it, say, how'd that meeting go? Was that valuable? Did we get everything we need to do based on the agenda? Evaluate that meeting, evaluate my organization, evaluate. Most recently, I made a spreadsheet and I said, evaluate the organization of the spreadsheet based upon how a third party might look at it. Is it readable? Is it understandable? And it gave me a great evaluation for that. So again, a great way to organize to get more, I'd say, advice on how to organize is that evaluation part. It will definitely give you some pointers. So what are we talking about, like where the rubber meets the road here? Here's the example prompt pattern. So I want you to turn these notes into a clear agenda with goals, discussion topics, decisions needed, and action items with owners. Simply put, that's going to take your notes and give you everything you need, and it's going to do it in a matter of seconds. So that's the most useful one. But if you can start building onto that and start thinking about it like this. Like we could start tweaking this prompt pattern. Turn these notes into a clear agenda with goals. And then I could put prioritize the goals based on imagining it knows our strategic priority. Prioritize the goals based on what you think will have the greatest impact on our strategic goals for the year. You could do that. And it's going to start fine tuning it and make sure the output is even more finely tailored to what you need. So that's the last use case I have today, which I'm going to discuss, is organizing. I think my question for this is just genuinely, and you can give me a thumbs up or anything else. Who out there right now, your organizations or you personally, is already using AI to organize for meeting notes, to help you kind of plan and set your schedules? Is anybody already doing that out there? Gary, cool. Anybody else? So if not, I'm going to be honest with you. For most people, I understand the reluctance to write. I understand the comparison of like loving to brainstorm with people or plan with people versus AI. Get those two. Organizing is where I really do think the majority of people could really jump in there and net themselves some great efficiencies in the way they're doing things and saves themselves tons of time. Uh, and I will say this because we're going to talk about ethics, but I got to mention it here. Most of the people I've talked to that are not doing the organizations that are not doing it this way are doing it out of the concern that it might uh, basically outsource a lot of those more administrative or executive, like assistant type functions to AI and make it so that those people don't have, a lot of work to do. That's not been my experience. It's enabled them to more smartly manage calendars and look at it and look at the outcomes of meetings, plan them better, make sure that everything, frankly, it's allowed them to focus on the more value added parts of planning and organizing rather than the administrative part of it. So that's my advice. Take it with a grain of salt. I don't editorialize often, but if that's where your organization is on the fence and they're worried about that, it's not been my experience at all that it's outsourced or really made their work redundant. It's only upped the value that they bring to the organization. So with that, that's the use case portion of it. I am going to jump ahead here and hit on our next section. We are going to hit prompting. We're going to try to do it together in the next 15 minutes or so and do it in a way that won't stress you out. I promise. So when we're prompting, I always like to have what I say before you get into it to have the correct mindset before you start typing in there. I want you to think less like you're asking a tool and more like you're talking to that intern, that colleague. They're very new to your organization or whatever context you're in. They don't know anything about it. They have tons of knowledge. They're very educated, very smart. They just lack a lot of sight around it. And so, it's limited in what they can do at the moment. So, in order to get what you need from them, you got to be clear. You got to be clear about exactly because if you've ever had experience, I've managed many staffs before. If you go and tell them, you're like, okay, I need you to do a summary on this by the end of the day. Yeah, they will accomplish it 9 times out of 10, but they come back and you're like, oh, this isn't what I expected. Well, when I said summary, what I actually needed you to do was to take this section and give me some decision points. And so you end up, doing the red lettering on it and say, go back, try again, right? Well, what we're trying to do in this instance is not waste your time doing that. If we can have the right mindset from the beginning and know that AI needs a lot of direction and clarity, we can build that into our props up front and not have to redo our work after we don't get necessarily the outputs we're looking for. So here's a key thing. I wrote it down here. AI rewards intentional thinking. It's not about being clever. It's not about creative writing. It's about being very clear and concise about what you're doing. And what do I mean by that? Is here's some basics before we jump into it. What AI responds to it is a role you give, context begin because it does not have the context you provide it, so you got to tell a story, and those constraints that you set. If you remember those three things when you're prompting: role, context, constraints, I guarantee your outputs are pretty much going to be on par with what you need most of the time, especially around that area of constraints. But also, what I want you to think of AI prompting is that it lacks that background. It doesn't know, again, in context. It takes direction very well. It's going to do exactly what you tell it to. And it likes to take things in logical steps. And so it will often ask you, do you want to do this next? Do you want to do this next? Or should I do this next? It wants to move in that fashion to kind of build up because, again, it's predicting what it thinks you want. And so it's better to kind of tell it what you want up front, maybe give some steps, and then follow that pattern and give it more steps. So if you take these six things in mind as you're approaching prompting, it's going to already elevate your game like 10 times better than say, going to say ChatGPT and just typing in a question or using it as if you were using a search bar, which some people do. And they will give you answers that way. It just won't give you exactly what you need. The biggest mistakes that I've seen when I've taught some prompting here and there are being very vague. Things like, for example, I need a analysis on a comparison of X and B. Okay, that's very vague. What kind of comparison do you need? What kind of points are you going to be? So again, just taking for granted that it doesn't have that context, which is that second point. People don't put in enough context, so it has to make stuff up. And when it makes stuff up, you never know what you get. And the biggest one is accepting what it generates. You have to check it. You have to check its work. And we'll talk about that in the ethics section a little bit more. But I just wanted here's a good example of that one. And if you've ever used it for this, you'll know what I mean. Like I was just trying to watch some playoff games this weekend, but I don't know what channel, what streaming channel. I don't know where to watch stuff anymore, and I'm sure you all have a very similar feeling. And so, of course, my wife says, "Why don't you go to ChatGPT?" Well, the problem is that streaming providers change so often, and content goes here, and rights to broadcasting changes so much these days that that ChatGPT cannot understand the context. It doesn't understand what it needs to put out there. So it'll give you the best answer it can, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be wrong. And so that's a good example. Understanding that what it puts out, you still have to check what it puts out. It's not always going to be right. In fact, a lot of times it will be wrong. And it is your responsibility to kind of check that. So let's talk about it. We're going to jump into writing that prompt, like I said, but I want to give you some examples here of a good formula you can use. I use a role, task, and context constraints. And if you keep those four in mind, role, task, context, constraints, you'll usually get a pretty good prompt. So here's an example of a weak prompt out there. Write an email about a policy change. Has no context whatsoever. It doesn't even know who this is for. It has no role. It knows the task. It wants you to write an email. There's no context behind it, and there's no constraints. So it's going to do whatever it wants. The stronger prompt in this example is act as an HR business partner. That's the role. That's who's writing this thing. The task, draft a clear. Again, we're already putting some constraints on here. Clear, friendly context email explaining a policy change. So task mixed in with a little bit of context constraint and more constraints here at the end. Keep it under 150 words, so very concise. Avoid legal jargon, none of that, and focus on what employees need to do next. So again, constraints, very clear there. So you can see the difference already. Like that first one is going to get you Lord knows what. I couldn't tell you. The second one is probably going to get you 90% of the way of what you need. Um, I put this call out here because I think it's important to remember that even though the prompt is longer, I wouldn't necessarily say it's complicated. Uh, it just means thoughtful, right? It means planning ahead about what the output that you want. ChatGPT doesn't care about what 10, like $1 million vocabulary words you use, how complex you get it. It will try to, it doesn't care if you misspell things. It kind of tries to predict what you're trying to say. So don't overly complicate it. Just keep it very clear, concise about what those constraints are. So, any question about writing a prompt, anything you've wondered, because we're going to jump into it next. And before we do that, I just want to make sure we're feeling pretty good about prompting. Any questions? You can raise your hand or type it in the chat there. Right. Counting the 10 Mississippi in my head. It's not that you won't have a chance to ask a question at the end anyway, but this is the general. So, what I want to do now is we are going to practice this a little bit. As we're going to do the first one together, and then I got another prompt that I want to try out on. We're going to practice this as a group. Our task in this instance is to draft a meeting agenda that keeps a cross-functional group focused and productive. That's all we want to do. We're going to draft an agenda. I'm going to fire this up, head up to here, put up my chat here. So, crafting agenda. We're going to do this together. We're going to start with the role. So, I want somebody out there, you can chat it or take yourself off mute. Give me a role of the person who's drafting this agenda. Who is this agenda coming from? Be as specific as you can be. Somebody give me a role. Make sure I can see my event planner. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get there. I'm going to go ahead with my task. I'm going to ask you to write an agenda as an event planner. Okay, I can push enter right now and we get something, but it's not going to be very good. So we need to start adding in that context and constraints part of it. So let's start thinking about this. What's our context? What is this event? What are we? What is the event? Anybody out there? Give me for it. Okay, right agenda. Okay, I'm going to go back here for an April wedding. Okay, so we got a little bit of context now. We know it's for a wedding. Any other context? Anybody want to add anything particular about this April wedding? Let's have fun for a second. Do Mad Libs. Give me one or two things that are special about this wedding. Whoa, Pamela, I love it. Right agenda for an April wedding in Hawaii. Okay. Oh, no, Diana. I'm going to go with Diana's. Okay. And I'm going to go with Christine's there. Okay. In Winchester, VA, with a budget of 50K. That's kind of a constraint that we're putting there. Let's put another constraint. The bride is a real bridezilla. Again, I don't care what language I'm using. It understands what bridezilla is. The bride is a real bridezilla. She's very anxious and detailed oriented, constantly emailing me. The guest list is 150. Okay, now the last kind of constraint. What do we need to output? What are we trying to get? So we're trying to get this agenda, but what exactly do we need on this agenda? Give me some ideas. What do you want the agenda to include? Ceremony. The agenda must include ceremony, venue, venue options, food, beverage, cost, all decisions that must be decided, plus timeline. Also, think about attire shop. Okay, so now we're getting. I put a lot of okay. We got a lot of context here, and for this one, but already we put a lot in here, and it started with the prompt. I was like, I need an agenda for an April wedding, but now we've added a lot more. So let's see what we get from this. Give it a minute. The more constraints, the more you put in there. Obviously, the more time. Mine, and by the way, you're seeing the thinking mine does. You won't necessarily see that. Mine is set to show me exactly how it's thinking. Yeah, I caught it. April 26th is crazy. So here we go. Here's a good budget snapshot for us. It's keeping us. Mine, again, is trained to kind of check my blind spots for me. John, that's a really, yeah, it will give a completely different flavor again with that context that you have in there, quality prompts again. But already look at what we have here. We have options. We have this agenda is pretty packed with all kinds of things to consider. Now we're gonna have to go through and edit this and maybe fine tune it a little bit more. But just for comparison, it's still going. It's still thinking. Oh, by it gave me a decision tracker there. I'm gonna stop it and show you by comparison now. Write me an agenda with a budget for an upcoming April wedding. Okay, so I'm going back to my general prompt now, the very search, bar one, and let's see what it gives us in this case, just for comparison. Still happy to do it. Not so bad. It's covering still a lot of those things we have, but again in a more generic way. Like it's not giving me reality checks. It's not helping me out with my bridezilla. It's not going into some of the level of detail that our previous one did, especially in regards to the timeline. Yeah, good call, John. I'm used to being in a classroom. This is my first online doing this prompted one. Usually we'd follow along. But anyway, that being said, you see how, again, those constraints, that context, everything you add to it is going to get you, generally speaking, some better outputs for you. Let's hop on back to here. Now I'm looking at my watch. I'm gonna instead do this one as homework if you want to do it. But I did have another prompt here, uh, and you can play with these all day long about drafting an email, so a writing prompt to a customer delinquent on account payments and our responses to previous correspondence. So you can see how the general prompt would be just write an email to a customer at a collection email to a customer. That'll get you what you need. But if you go in there and start thinking about context, constraints, draft an email that is 200 words or less, friendly, not aggressive, that increases the chance that the person is likely to respond to the email. Start putting those constraints and context in there, and you're going to get a better prompt. So hopefully that's clear there. But the last part I did want to cover in our last few minutes here is the ethics part of it, because the responsibility lies with you. You have to check yourself. This is a tool. You are the one using the tool. Therefore, you are the one going to be blamed when something bad happens with that tool. So, when I think about AI, and really where ethics starts with it, AI accelerates your work. It's meant to be a tool that helps you. It's if you're using it to replace your judgment, to take accountability or your responsibility, it's not going to do that. Um, for example, what I mean by that is if you accept the decision that AI puts out there verbatim, and then you go and implement that decision and bad stuff happens, it wasn't AI's judgment, it was your judgment. You didn't use the right judgment in vetting what AI output there and asking it for other blind spots and trying to see the whole context around that. And so that's where I want you to remember AI assist, humans decide. And that's the way it will probably be for quite some time, I hope. So AI produces the outputs, not answers, outputs. You own what you submit or share or act on. So whatever you're putting in there, garbage inputs, garbage outputs, that's on you. So if you're going in there and saying, write me a biased report that shows me how the people in this department are ruining the organization, it's not AI's fault when it gives you a biased report that paints those people as bad people. You have to be aware of your inputs and your biases. Speed, and then obviously, speed without judgment scales mistakes. I have seen it time and time again where AI has a great looking output, people accept it verbatim, They go out there, they publish it, it's out there, and then a big mistake is caught, and then it only snowballs, and the mistakes get larger and larger. So again, just keep considering those things. But when we're looking at guardrails, I always put it in these three camps. These are great ones for you to keep around your office, to keep up as post-it notes, just to keep yourself in check on these three areas. The first one, confidentiality. Let me back up for a second. When you think about AI, there are the publicly available large language models out there where that data, whatever you input is public data. It goes out there, people can research, it just becomes part of the big pool of information out there. And then there are the ones trained internally, they're proprietary AIs. They're really trained on all your organization's internal data, everything that's out there. I'm thinking about things like if any of you use Microsoft Copilot, it might be trained on your organizational data. Regardless, you need to be very clear when you're putting information about people and their information, their private information into there. Clarify with your CIOs or with anybody else, because otherwise that information can become available to other people and become discoverable. So be very careful with PII. Also, proprietary info. Don't put anything that you wouldn't want the public to see in there unless advised by, again, your CIO, your policies. Anything that you think you wouldn't want the public to see, I wouldn't generally go out there willy nilly, especially without certain guardrails or boundaries towards that content. I wouldn't go around putting it in AI. Also, any dates, verification is that second one. Anything that it's outputting to you, again, checking that, vetting against dates and numbers, vetting its sources. If you have kids, and this is something I work with my kids on, they love to do research on ChatGPT or other ones or Grok and get all these wonderful claims. But you know what they rarely ever do? Hey, where did you get that from? Can you give me the citations for that? Can you give me the links to where you pulled this information from? Verify. Trust but verify. Internal policies, vet it against your internal policies. Vet it against claims, against anything internally, claims that you may have, any issues out there. Verification and vetting the information that, again, it outputs is very important to save yourself from embarrassment, but also to prevent those errors from scaling down the line. And then finally, the accountability piece. That is, you have accountability. Whatever it outputs is what you owned. You accept that output, and you say, "This is what I got from my work with AI." And so, if you remember these three areas, confidentiality, verification, and accountability, and you just keep them at the back of the mind, you're going to reduce your potential risk towards any of the bad stuff that happens, like biases, getting the wrong information, making the wrong assumptions with the data, with the outputs that GPT or other AI models put out there. You'll protect yourself. And that's what I'm most concerned about. Whether your organization is protected or all those are much greater, larger matters for them to discuss about internal policies. But in terms of your individual safety, these three will get you there. So that is a lot. I'm going to skip that one to get to this last one to say, I really want you to get started today or tomorrow. My goal is to pick the one thing approach. Pick one task you already do weekly and try to configure that with AI. Try to see how it would be using AI to help you complete that process. So that's the one thing, one task, and pick one of the areas that I have there in terms of writing, organization, clarification, thought modeling. Pick one of those to focus on right off the bat to start building it into your workflow in that particular area. And then once you get comfortable with that, move to the next one and so on and so forth until it just kind of becomes part of your workflow. That's my advice. Again, what I would say is view it as kind of an intern that's there to help you. You give it clear instructions, you give it clear context, you're going to get really good outputs. Vet the outputs, be safe, and I think you're going to be very pleased with what you got. You got my name right there. Remember that Laurel Ridge is offering, this is very tip of the iceberg type stuff I'm covering today, 101, but they have that 4-hour course coming up at the top, at the end of the month, where they're going to go more in depth on a lot of these areas and give you a lot more time to practice, hopefully. But if you have any questions in the meantime, please email me, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to help you out with any AI issues that are cropping up, or help you fine tune some of the prompts and other things that you're trying to get done out there. I know it can be shaky getting started, but once you get in there, you'll love it. So thank you again for your time. Hopefully, I've given you a few tips today to chew off on, and I'll turn it back over to Christine and Diana.
Dustin, thank you so much. What a great webinar. And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope that you found tools right away that you can begin using, and that you'll work smarter, not harder. Again, if you'd like to learn more, we'll go more in depth on January 29th. We'll be here at the Middletown campus from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and we'll look at ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, and we'll create more of a toolkit to streamline your workflow, automate repetitive tasks, and boost your daily productivity. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. As promised, we will send out the recording. And if this has sparked an interest for you to bring customized training to your location, please reach out to any of us. We'll hang out for a few minutes here. You can always respond to an email we send you, and our website is laurelridgeworkforce.com. With that, thank you, friends. Be safe, go be productive, and have a blessed day. Dustin, thank you so much. Great job. We appreciate you.
No problem. I appreciate the chance to get out there and do this one. You know, this uh, this is a new, bold area for a lot of people, so I was very excited to do it.
It really is. And people seem either very excited about it or terrified. There's not a lot of people, in my humble opinion, that are in between.
Yeah, and and I understand that's why I try to zoom out or zoom in. Like Christine, like I think a lot of people get caught up in all the big high ideas and the changes in society and and that's anxiety inducing. You got to focus on what you can control, right? And all you
Yeah.
can control is how you use the tool or how you're going to use it. And that's why you don't worry about all that stuff. You can't control it. Zoom in, worry about what you can control. So
Yep. Yep.
glad to do it. Thank you all, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all more and more in the New Year's too.
Absolutely. I'll be reaching out very soon
Yep.
with our upcoming classes, Dustin. So keep an eye out on an email from
Yep.
me. And by the way, since tax season is coming up, please let me know if you need any help accessing your W-2. You should have it obviously
Okay,
by
good.
January 31st on your Cardinal. So
Okay, good.
when you access all your VCCS account, all your apps are there. Your Cardinal will be one of those apps. But if you need help, just let me know.
I just need an accountant. My tax situation for 2025 is going to be a bloodbath. I don't even know where to begin. Like
I
with
get it.
with all the severance and then payment here and then self, employed here. Oh my God. Anyway,
I get it. Yeah. So
if you get a good accountant, let me know. That's what I need. So
well,
yeah,
awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Dustin. This was great. And yeah, like I said, I'll be in touch with any upcoming
yep,
opportunities. If you think of any other titles for webinars, just let me know.
yeah. Thanks everybody. Have a great week. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank
You
you,
too,
Bye.
Tanya.
Dustin.
We'll start at 1:15.
That sounds perfect.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Great job, Diana.
Bye.